Do okay, Ace. If you just, or we can both admit if there's anyone else that comes through, but um, that's absolutely fine. But hello, everybody, and welcome to mine and Michelle's workshop this evening or today for you guys if you're in the US. How many people are like put in the chat where you're coming from? Because obviously, Michelle, you are in the US, but I am currently in the Isle of Man. So there's probably like a mixture. I love that. Brighton, I love it. So many different places. That's ace. So this is all about menstrual cycle awareness and proactive fertility. And I'm going to do a little short introduction just for me and Michelle, and then we'll go into it. So I am a menstrual health coach, and I trained about almost 2 years ago now. And yeah, I also do a lot of like work with feminine energy and female empowerment. And you've probably seen me maybe on LinkedIn, but also I spend a lot of time on my Instagram platform and building my business Femme Collective, which I started at the end of my uni degree. And I kind of got into this work through struggles with my personal health, which I'll talk about a little bit more. And I actually wrote and illustrated a book for teenagers all about periods. And so, yeah, that was really like my first entry into this work. But I will discuss a little bit more. I don't want to go into too much of an intro, but just so everyone knows who is not familiar with me. And if I pass it over to Michelle to give you guys a little introduction to you as well.
Awesome. Thanks, Emily. I'm so excited for this. So I'm Michelle, so if you don't know me, and my path is a bit different. So I'm a scientist by training, which you'll hear more about, but really have for the past few years gone deep into this menstrual and fertility health. I have a practitionership now and have really been working with people to get ahead of their fertility just for overall health, first and foremost, and then, of course, to set themselves up for success in the future. But let's dive right in, Emily. Back to you.
I love it. And it's honestly, to me, the whole work around fertility, it's so incredibly important and so amazing. And it's something that I delved into a little bit in my coaching. But obviously, Michelle, you know so much more. And I'm actually so excited to learn from you today because it's really, really important stuff. And it just works so perfectly together. So let's get into it. Let me just get this going. We're recording and everything is working. I'm always checking the tech. So hello everyone, welcome. Today I'm going to be diving into menstrual cycle awareness and really looking at how our cycle impacts our well-being and our overall health and more. I'll be focusing on the phases of our cycle, helping us understand each phase a little bit more and a little bit deeper, and really touching on our hormones, our nervous system, and also management of pain. And then the amazing Michelle is going to take over and will take us into like fertility and understanding that a little bit more and in depth. And I'm sure a couple of things will overlap, but it's always good because it's like super helpful education. So you can never really learn too much. So, a little bit about my background. We discussed it just a little bit earlier, but I am a menstrual cycle coach and facilitator. The work that I have done recently and since I've trained is I do a lot of stuff in corporate spaces. I host a lot of workshops, in-person retreats, and I also do a lot with teenagers. So going into schools and teaching them about menstrual cycle awareness, which has been really fulfilling work. Um, and my kind of journey into this career has been slightly different. I didn't really go and have a medical background or a science background. I actually have a background in art and design, hence the book about periods and illustrating that and writing that because, yeah, my background is visual communications. And during my degree, I actually fell into a spiral of really poor health. I suffered with IBS, which I think a lot of women, I say IBS like that, but since I've gone on this journey of understanding a lot more, but I say that because a lot of women also kind of go through this same situation with IBS and really not knowing what's going on. And it really affected my health, my life since I was a teenager. And my periods also really suffered. And for so long until, I was probably about 19, I was back and forth from the doctors, colonoscopies, endoscopies, trying to figure out what's wrong with me. And really, I quickly realized that they weren't helping me as I really wanted to, and I wasn't getting anywhere. And I just felt super dismissed. And I just found that so many women felt the same. And so I decided to take my health into my own hands and go on a completely holistic health route, which completely changed my life, opened up so many doors. And then I decided to go on and train. And so here I am, I would say probably 3 years later since going on this journey in menstrual cycle awareness. And yeah, it's been an incredible journey so far. So, what is menstrual cycle awareness? So, menstrual cycle awareness is an embodied mindfulness practice to make relevant the menstrual cycle in our everyday lives, from physical, mental, emotional, and our overall spiritual well-being. And it's really important because it's all about overall health as well. Our menstrual cycles is the key to so much. And I think we are learning that slowly, and it's really kind of coming to the forefront of things now. I think, but still we are getting there. And that is what I've learned on my journey. So it's all about that deep awareness and understanding, which makes such the difference. It really, really does. And so my approach in this work is all through these three main areas. So that being the nervous system. So we're going to touch on that a little bit more. And you will see that these areas do come in, and this approach does come into my work as we go forward. So the nervous system, psychology, and also the endocrine system. So we will touch on them a little bit more throughout my workshop. So a little bit down to the basics. So stages of the menstrual cycle. And first and foremost, I also want to say that I am actually currently in my menstrual phase. I have been in such a rest period this week. Seriously, today my energy was very, very low, and I was like, girl, you got to do this. And so please share with me where you are in your cycle. Are you in your menstrual phase? Are you in your follicular phase? Where are you? Because it's really important, like we've just discussed, having that awareness and being really, gentle and compassionate with ourselves. Like today, for example, I knew I had this coming up, but yeah, I'm on my period, and still, I had to give myself a lot more compassion. And that's really, really important. So it's great to really share where we're at. So yeah, I can't actually see the pings coming up, but hopefully everyone's sharing. So yeah, this is the stages of our menstrual cycle. So I'm going to discuss them in a little bit more depth. So menstruation, our period, typically lasts between 3 to 7 days. While shorter or longer periods can occur, they are considered irregular. And it's really important to really monitor this. And it's really important to understand that everybody is so different, and individual variation is completely normal for all of us, okay? Periods are a natural biological process that most women will experience, generally starting between the ages of 10 and 16, and then continuing on until we reach menopause. However, there has been observed trends actually that this is really beginning at younger ages, and yeah, even as low as 8 years old. And this is why this work is not only important for you guys and everyone listening here today, but also for all of the younger women that we have in our lives, because a lot of the times in primary schools, and I know this because I'm going into to high schools, but they aren't getting this work and this education. And so when they're starting as young as 8, it's really important that we do share, because yeah, that's how the education and understanding grows. So a full menstrual cycle usually ranges from 24 to 35 days, with the average being around 28 days. So if someone consistently experiences cycles shorter than 21 or longer than 35, so if you've got like a 20-day cycle and then your next cycle is 42, this really is an irregularity and could highlight an underlying issue, and it really should be looked into and it should be monitored, and it shouldn't be something that we just kind of let slip to the side. So yes. So a healthy period starts with healthy follicles. And I really love this graph. I think this is a great one. Understanding our key hormones that regulate the menstrual cycle really helps us to recognize importance of hormonal balance. Now, the two main hormones that play a significant role in the menstrual cycle are estrogen. And as we move into the pre-ovulation phase, as you can see on the graph, estrogen is going to begin to rise. And this hormone influences the growth and the release of an egg from the ovary. And then progesterone. As we approach premenstruation, progesterone levels start to increase, and you can see that on the graph in green, and estrogen is in that orange line. If fertilization occurs, then progesterone helps prepare the uterine lining for implementation. And then we've got the other two key hormones involved in our cycle include LH, which is luteinizing hormone, and this triggers ovulation, leading to the release of a mature egg from the ovary. And then the FSH, which is follicle stimulating hormone, which stimulates the growth and the development of ovarian follicles in the ovaries. And really maintaining hormonal balance is really essential for a smooth and healthy overall menstrual cycle. Okay, it's all about balance and looking after our hormones. And as you can see in the graph, you can see the follicles ripening during the follicular phase, leading to ovulation, where the mature egg is released into the fallopian tube. And if the egg is not fertilized, the uterine lining sheds, marking the beginning of menstruation, of periods, and the whole cycle will then continue on again. So, hormonal fluctuations can seem quite complicated, and it is quite complicated. It's quite scientific. And if you're like me, who doesn't have that background, it can be quite hard to get your head around it. But for me, I think it's really important to kind of learn it as the first half of the cycle and the second half. And I find this is kind of the easiest way to get our head around it. So estrogen primarily is our kind of like get shit done phase. It's like the go-getter, and estrogen begins to rise, stimulating the growth and development of ovarian follicles. And this is when the body is preparing for ovulation. This is when an egg is released, and estrogen peaks just before ovulation. So it's in our first half of our cycle. Okay. And this is when the body is most fertile. Second half of the cycle is primarily progesterone. Okay, which is our nurturing hormone. It's that preparing the body for a baby, for pregnancy hormone. Okay, so it's not the get shit done like estrogen, it's like the yin to the yang, but we need them both equally, and they need to be balanced, and that's really important. And progesterone is heightened in the luteal phase, so in the second half of our cycle. And so if fertilization does not occur, progesterone levels will drop, which leads to the shedding of the uterine lining, and our period begins again. So the key takeaway is that the first half is estrogen. This is when estrogen dominates, and then the second half is when our progesterone dominates. And they are the yin to the yang. They need to be balanced, and that's the really important takeaway from this. And earlier we did touch a little bit on the different phases of our cycles, but we didn't go too much into it. And I love this section. I love learning all about our phases. I think this was what really introduced me to the work, and I love this so much. So as well, kind of using ways to kind of make it easier for us to remember and learn, I like to use the inner season circle, which I think is really in a simple and effective way to remember and understand each phase, especially if you are quite new to this work. This is also really helpful for younger women who are around us as well. I find it is a really nice analogy because it really like aligns with the seasons. Like our menstrual phase really aligns with that inner winter, in inner spring, and our follicular phase when we're kind of stepping out of our shell and we're coming out a little bit more. And then that autumn when we're in our luteal phase, it's like we want to nurture, we want to rest. So kind of going around it like that, I think it's really helpful. In a winter being our period, in a summer being ovulation, when we're more full of energy, we're starting to say yes to things, and we're really starting to show up for ourselves. And so I really love this, using this analogy. However, we can also use our menstrual phase, our follicular phase, our ovulatory phase, and our luteal phase. So yeah, I'm going to touch on these a little bit more and go into more depth with them. So these are the 4 phases of the menstrual cycle, and I'm going to talk a little bit about how we can really work with them. So the menstrual phase, which is our inner winter, is all about rest and reflection. And roughly this is day 1 to about 5. And this is when your period starts and your body is shedding the uterine lining, which we've just discussed. So what's happening? We know estrogen and estrogen is on the rise, and the brain's left and right hemisphere actually communicate more effectively during this time, which makes it a great time for intuition and reflection. And so, yeah, I love to journal during my period. It's a really great time for that, which I think is such an interesting fact, because our periods, they're so powerful, and that phase of our cycle is so powerful. And so how can we really work with it? So prioritizing rest, prioritize reflection. It's a perfect time for manifesting, journaling, gentle movement. So like switching those spin classes for a yoga class or something a little bit more gentle. I think small ways to cycle sync like that can really be massively beneficial. And it's a really easy way to just kind of honor that stage of your cycle and where you are. So yeah, nourishing our body as well is so important during this phase of our cycle. Hydration and avoiding over exercising and high stress activities, and also too much caffeine. Switch to decaf if you're a coffee lover. And then we move into our follicular phase, which is that inner spring energy. I love the follicular phase. And this is all about creativity. Our energy is on the rise. And this is roughly day 6 to 13. After your period ends, your body prepares for ovulation, and estrogen then rises, boosting energy and also increasing, boosting our mood. So rising estrogen levels equals more energy, more creativity, more focus. And dopamine and serotonin levels are also increased, making this a really great time for socializing, new projects, starting new creative tasks. And how we can really work with this energy is by setting new goals, brainstorming, really planning our month ahead in this phase, and engaging in strength training now. So we've moved out of that menstrual phase and we're into our follicular. So strength training is really great. Even running, higher energy workouts is super important. And then socializing. So this is when you're probably going to feel most magnetic, that like glowing phase. I always feel like the good makeup days, the good skin days, like they always happen in this follicular leading up to ovulation. So really encourage eating a high protein diet. It's really important. But many people don't realize that it is ovulation that is the main event of our cycles. The release of the egg of not, which is also a real health indicator. And with no ovulation, there is no menstruation. But an anovulatory bleeding can still occur, which is why we should be checking our cervical fluid it's so important. Michelle's going to touch on that a little bit more. And it's a really, really important. And a fun fact, when we release an egg and it doesn't get fertilized, did you know that the egg actually just absorbs back into our own bodies? Which I never knew, because I always thought that, but it's such an interesting fact. Our bodies are honestly incredible. Incredible. So then we move on, like we've just said, into our ovulation phase, and this is our inner summer, and this is when it's all about that inner confidence, magnetism. We're really going to start feeling ourselves during our ovulation phase, and this is roughly day 13 to day 18. But it's really important to note that we all ovulate and are fertile on different days. So not necessarily just day 14 or whenever your app might indicate. And that's why understanding cervical fluid is really, really important, because we don't just want to trust these apps. We need to be aware of the signs, the symptoms that we can have. And this is really important to know and to really start to monitor. So during this phase, our estrogen is peaked, testosterone is also high, and you're going to feel confident, you're going to feel a little bit more sociable, your libido is also at its highest, and metabolism is going to start to speed up, and you're probably going to feel the most magnetic. So it's really a great time for networking, maybe dating, speaking up, and you can really work with it by doing higher energy workouts, socializing. Hormones are going to make you feel extra radiant, and eat foods really rich in B vitamins and zinc to really support ovulation. But it's really important to note that, like, as I'm discussing these phases and how you may feel, and if you're kind of not resonating with this could just be a sign that your hormones are out of balance. So if you're feeling like, I don't feel myself during my ovulation, or it's a bad time for me, this could just be a sign of imbalanced hormones, and it's just important to monitor. And that's why tracking your cycle is so important. And it's not all just about fertility. It's really important to know that it's a health indicator for women, and tracking is really going to help. So if you don't already in an app, I was even at one point just doing it in my calendar. You don't have to have an app. I also was doing it in my Google Drive document. I'm going to share a link as well in case anybody is interested. But I find that for tracking data, it's really helpful to just have a clear outline on kind of like a spreadsheet almost. Because sometimes I find in apps, you can't actually like see the data clearly, and you like input your symptoms, but then you can't see it quite clearly. So I'll share with that a little bit. And then we move on into our luteal phase, which is our inner autumn. And this, again, it's about winding down. It's about reflection as we move into that menstruation phase. So this is all about preparing our body for our next bleed. And progesterone is rising during this phase, which is going to cause a little bit of mood shifts, a little bit of lower energy. And this is really that PMS phase, if not well supported. And like PMS, it's okay, but severe PMS, we shouldn't be experiencing extreme pain, severe pain. But as a woman, we are going through these hormonal changes, and we are going through these shifts. So expecting that is normal. So what's happening in this phase? We know that progesterone is increasing. It's making you feel probably more introverted, a little bit emotional, and your body is really preparing for either pregnancy or your next bleed. So you're going to feel a little bit more sensitive, a little bit less social. And how to work with that is simplifying tasks, saying no to overcommitments. I think, we're so, as women, we often people please and say yes, but it's so important during this time, if you are going to say no and you are going to focus on yourself and not overcommitting and just prioritizing rest, because rest is so productive. It is so productive for you in your luteal phase. It's so productive in your menstrual phase. And if you are a projector by human design, I don't know if everyone wants to share their human design, if because I'm just obsessed. But this is also so important. Rest is productive. And as women, I think we often are like drawn into this like hustle culture. But during these phases, that's what we really want to focus on. Doing gentler workouts like yoga or Pilates, instead of maybe high intensity cardio. And then Magnesium-rich foods. Magnesium is so important. It's such a great supplement for women. And you can find that in dark chocolate, pumpkin seeds, to ease our PMS. And prioritizing sleep, relaxation, self-care, setting boundaries, your time, your energy, not pushing through. And I want to move on into the first theory that I actually came across when I was training as a menstrual health coach. And this is the polyvagal theory, and it's all about our nervous system. Okay, so we touched on that a little bit before and how that's really embedded in my approach. And so the parasympathetic nervous system is where growth happens, and it's where you embody your feminine more deeply on a deeper level. It's, that rest, that digest, where we can heal, where we can flow. And that's why when we're talking about being, in our luteal phase, in our menstrual phase, we really want to be in that rest space, in that digest space, because this is where we're going to be able to heal, especially if we do deal with difficulties with our periods, such as severe pain. Okay, so the polyvagal system refers to a concept developed by a neuroscientist to describe the autonomic nervous system's role in regulating social behavior and our emotional responses. So, our sympathetic nervous system is responsible for chronic pain, and it is the nervous system's response to stress, anxiety, and pain. So, if we are spending the majority of our time trapped in this sympathetic nervous system, it's going to negatively contribute to our lives. And so it's really important that we learn how we can move from our sympathetic into our parasympathetic nervous system. And learning the techniques to do that and the tools is going to help us to regulate, and it's going to help us deal if we're dealing with anxiety, burnout, chronic pain, all of those things, any PMS symptoms that we are dealing with. It's really important that we learn how to regulate our nervous system. And some ways that we already do this is things like yawning, posture shifts, fidgeting, sighing, long exhales. That's all ways that our nervous system is naturally regulating itself, and ways that we can help ourselves as well. For me, to help regulate my nervous system, and I love everyone to kind of go away and think about whether this is something that helps them too, because things such as being creative, dancing, movement, cooking is such a big one for me. Like, I'm such in my feminine flow, I'm such in my peaceful era when I'm cooking, and I feel so regulated when I'm doing that. And just nurturing myself, self-care, getting outside in nature, it is all so important for regulating our nervous system. And this is going to go into it a little bit more, because things such as, yoga, breath work, somatic practices, they are also amazing tools to help us regulate our nervous system. And so these are going into management and a little bit of further tools and techniques that we can use. And so period pain is common, okay? But a severe period pain is not something that you should endure. Severe period pain is not normal. And pain is often a protective response. But fear and our negative beliefs can actually make our pain worse and create a cycle of heightened pain. And so it's important to really work with our nervous system to try and reduce that. And our fear can really make the body more sensitive to pain. And there is a lot of fear around it, especially if we are somebody who has dealt with severe pain all of our lives, or it's something that we've gotten, used to, and it's something that we've created that kind of belief around that this happens to me. So learning to really manage that and manage our nervous system and regulate is really helpful to reducing the intensity overall of our pain. So lifestyle interventions for this can include things like massage, acupuncture is amazing, yoga, rest, so important, breath work, somatic practices, heat therapy, self-pleasure, mindfulness, avoiding caffeine, avoiding alcohol. It's really important for our inflammation to manage. Getting out in nature, grounding, earthing. Literally, there is free electrons in Mother Earth, and actually grounding the electrons will actually pass through and is transferred into the body. And there is now science behind this, and I know this is very holistical and woo-woo, but genuinely, like, grounding barefoot in the earth and making that connection, it's so important. The magnetism and the help that your body receives from being connected to the earth is incredible, and it can really help with stress, with inflammation in the body. And so, yeah, although it sounds a bit woo-woo, I genuinely do barefoot ground in the grass every morning. If it's raining, I try my best, but usually in the Isle of Man, the weather isn't great, but we've had some really great weather. So if you are somewhere with amazing weather, there's no excuse. So yeah, and also meditation, something that I do every day, as well as yoga. These are my real habits that I've integrated into my life, practicing yoga, breathwork, and meditation pretty much every day. And I actually have a meditation that I recorded for everyone. It's all about healing our menstrual stories. So it is in relation to our menstrual cycles. And it's such a beautiful meditation to really go back to that healing and go back to the story that we carry, because a lot of us can carry a lot of shame in relation to our periods, in relation to our cycles. And from a child, all the stories we're told, all the shame we get instilled. And so this meditation really goes back there. And it's also an amazing technique to help regulate our nervous systems. And I think a lot of times we do go away and we will do these workshops, and then we don't take away the tools straight away. And I think doing something like this is really helpful to actually just instill the work and the learnings. So I'm going to share it with everybody. It is free. I will share it in the chat box as soon as I come off, so everyone can have a look. And also, it'd be great to get feedback, because it is ASMR, because I'm obsessed with ASMR, and I recorded an ASMR meditation for the first time. So I'd love to hear everyone's feedback. And before I leave you all and pass over to Michelle, I just want to touch a little bit on natural, cramp and pain relief methods that we can use, because I get this question quite a lot, and how I can really help myself naturally for women who are sick of taking a million paracetamols and ibuprofen, and they really want to manage their pain naturally. If you are someone who suffers, herbal remedies are so incredible. Things like raspberry leaf tea, amazing, ginger tea for inflammation, and things like Agnus castus, supplements that are great for pain relief. Magnesium supplement is incredible, but you can have magnesium baths, magnesium oil, Epsom salt baths are incredible. I think it's an amazing tool, and quite cost effective as well. Lots of rest, lots of sleep. Yoga is up there with such an incredible tool and for our pain. So if you do practice yoga every day, or you want to get into it, it's honestly, I think that's what pulled me out of my anxiety, and what pulled me out of a lot of my pain that I was dealing with quite a few years ago now. Heat therapy, incredible. Heating pads, warmth, hot water bottles, but also TENS machines. I had a TENS machine when I was dealing with severe period pain, and I found it super, super useful. And it's also quite cost effective, because you just kind of buy the sticky pads, and they can last a really long time. And also castor oil packs. Seriously, I can't rave about castor oil packs enough. You can buy them on Amazon, or if you, like me the other day, sometimes I get a bit of an inflammation, and I felt it in my body, and I was like, get the castor oil out, rubbed it in the area, wrapped my tummy in cling film. The next day it was gone. It's honestly the most incredible tool to really drive out that inflammation from the body. These are obviously all holistic health tools as well, but really incorporating these remedies into your day can really help manage pain, but also just reducing your stress, reducing your inflammation, and just overall supporting your body's natural healing process. So thank you all, everybody, for listening to me. I was trying to get it in it like as quick as I could so I can pass over to Michelle because there's so much amazing information in this workshop. So I will leave everyone now and pass over to Michelle. Do you want me to stop sharing my screen as well so you can?
Sure, sure. And I'd love to pause if anyone has questions for Emily. Thank you so much. That was a beautiful setup for everything I'm about to go into, actually. So if
Oh,
anyone
amazing.
does have questions, please feel free.
And I'm going to have I will share my link as well in the chat box as well so
Yes,
everyone can see.
yes,
But
yes,
I'm
please.
so excited, Michelle.
Amazing. Okay, great. So again, beautiful, beautiful segue into everything I'm going to talk about. Just a deeper introduction on me. So like I mentioned, my background is in science. So I have a bachelor's in biology and master's in nutrition, and I'm currently director of science at a personalized wellness biotech company. But that all to say that despite all that privilege, despite all that education, I graduated at 24 years old, having been on the pill for 6 years, and had like no clue like about how to restore healthy periods. So I was also someone that struggled with like terrible, terrible cramping, terrible menstrual pain. Pretty convinced I had undiagnosed endometriosis, that's a whole different story. Um, but then also when I got into the fertility rabbit hole, we're not doing well. Like the stats are really quite awful. So 1 in 6 couples in developed nations, actually globally, so this isn't restricted to certain parts of the world, will experience infertility. And then the fetal and maternal health outcomes are actually quite abysmal, like considering how far we've come with modern medicine and technology. So I was like, there has to be a better way. And the better way that I have found is educating people early on. So I'm going to throw a lot at you in this, but if you just stick with it, and if you never hear from me again, you're already going to be ahead of like 90% of people. So, jumping right in, it's so important to understand when we're actually fertile. So, what that means when we talk about fertility, because I like to say our generation just has have sex, get pregnant, and die from mean girls in our head. That's what we all think. We think every time you have unprotected sex, you are risking a pregnancy. And that's actually not the case. So, at a very high level, when we look at male fertility, they are the ones that are fertile every single day, 24/7, 365. Female fertility is 6 days per cycle. We are infertile more time of the month, of the year, of our life than we are fertile. Yet, we're the ones that go on birth control, which I'll never not say that because it doesn't really make much sense to me. But just be aware that a collective fertility between a couple is only 6 days. So if you're trying to conceive, even though the man is fertile all the time, you need two. It's 6 days per cycle. So we need to understand when that is, if we want to avoid or if we want to target, or also if we just want to check in on our health, which is my main message, because this is not separate from the body, like Emily beautifully described. This is related to everything. So I love that you said, Emily, the main event of the menstrual cycle is not menstruation, it's ovulation. So we really should be calling it the ovulatory cycle. The whole point isn't to bleed. The whole point is to kick an egg out and see, is it going to get fertilized or is it not? So I won't go over this because I think you did a beautiful job explaining the two phases. So we can consider everything pre-ovulation, the pre-ovulatory phase. So as you beautifully described, that follicular phase from the start of our period to ovulation. And then we have post-ovulatory. This is the day of ovulation until the day our next cycle starts. So what's so important to understand and that no one tells us is that this is not a cookie cutter, everyone ovulates on day 14, which again, I love that you said system. What actually happens when we talk about different people's cycle lengths, and you as a person, you don't always have the same cycle length. It's really important to understand that what changes, so between person to person and between you and if you were traveling or sick or really stressed, you've noticed that maybe your period came at a different time. What changes is this pre-ovulatory phase. This phase can be quite flexible because it's very environmentally responsive. So I love this example where we take two people, say it's Emily and I, and both we had our period on the exact same day. She has a 26-day cycle, I have a 32-day cycle. As she said, these are both healthy parameters because anything between 25 days and 35 days we consider to be a healthy cycle length. So we're both assuming completely healthy cycles, bleeding on the same day. What that means, the post-ovulatory phase is always going to be 12 to 14 days. So this is actually quite fixed. So we can assume in a healthy cycle that her and I ovulated on the same day because this is always going to be 12 to 14. And that's because that's the life cycle of that corpus luteum. So the thing in our ovary that gets left behind when the egg ovulates, that's the thing that makes the progesterone. And it only lives 12 to 14 days if fertilization doesn't occur. You might have this shorter, but you wouldn't know that unless you were looking for it. And a short luteal phase, so that's anything less than those 12 days, that's also an indication that there's an underlying root issue. So that being said, very fixed. Post-ovulatory phase, always 12 to 14 days. It's infertile. Why is it infertile? Pregnancy is impossible after you've already ovulated because the egg only lives for about 12 to 24 hours. And as Emily said, it disintegrates back. And you could have unprotected sex as much as you want, and it's not going to happen, right? Because there's no egg. So this is an infertile phase. Your fertile phase is the 5 days before ovulation and the day of ovulation itself. And we'll talk about why that is. But really, the answer is cervical mucus. Cervical mucus allows you to have the 5-day luteal phase, or sorry, the 5-day fertile window, even though ovulation is a 1-day event. When we talk about the pre-ovulatory phase, so in my case, if I have the 26-day cycle, mine is shorter than hers, which is obviously longer because she has the longer cycle. What's longer is her pre-ovulatory phase. We call this relatively infertile. Now, why do we do that? We call it relatively infertile because these pre-ovulatory days, which include your period, are guilty until proven innocent. It is backwards from the court of law. The reason what we're going to be looking for is your fertile signs. So when you start to see cervical mucus, that's your indicator I have entered my fertile window, but you wouldn't know that unless you were looking for it. So that's why it's so important to be really clued in to our fertile signs. And this is also why the difference in cycle lengths that you see here, we're talking about day 14 being bad advice, even though every textbook and every doctor thinks that you ovulate on day 14. Let's just run it. Let's run the scenarios. So this is me with my 26-day cycle, assuming a healthy luteal phase of, let's just call it 13 days. I ovulated somewhere around day 13. Okay, so not day 14. Close. I ovulated on day 14. If I was trying to conceive and I'm listening to all the advice in the world telling me we all ovulate on day 14, and then I start trying to conceive on day 14 because I'm trying to hit that advice, I've missed it. I've missed it. I'm infertile because ovulation has already happened. That is crap advice for me. I'm a lot better trying on day 11, 12, or 13. So that's this example. Let's run it with Emily's example. So she has a 32-day cycle. Let's assume a healthy 13-day luteal phase. She's ovulating around day 19 of her cycle. So if she's trying to conceive and is again taking this day 14 advice, that puts her around here. Could she hit it? Potentially. Potentially. Maybe there was cervical mucus starting, and that's what allows the sperm to survive and await the ovulating egg, and maybe fertilization will happen. But she would be a lot better off trying to conceive on cycles day 17, 18, or 19, because that's a lot closer to ovulation. So all this to say, when we're talking about a healthy cycle, it's so important to understand you have a fixed length of your phase after ovulation. Confirming ovulation is so important because it's an indicator of health. And also very important to understand that your pre-ovulatory phase is different from other people's, and it can be different month to month for you as well, because again, this is quite environmentally responsive. And we'll get into why maybe that screws up some period tracker apps and other like birth control apps, but we'll save that for when we get a bit more into the fertile signs. So I love this question of, is your cycle actually healthy? Because a lot of us think that if my cycle comes when I expect it to, and it doesn't deviate too far from what's normal for me, I'm good to go. Like I don't have to worry about anything. And it's actually a bit deeper than that. So there are 6 factors of a healthy cycle. The first we talked about, which is making sure your cycle length falls within the 24 to 35 days, and that you don't have more than 8-day variation between cycles, because that would classify you as irregular. When you're looking at your menstruation, so your bleed quality, healthy would be defined as flow lasting 3 to 7 days, starting out heavy and getting a bit lighter. The color will be similar to like a rich red wine and then slowly transition to cherry red toward the end of your bleed. Healthy menstruation is the only time you should be bleeding. So there should be no mid-cycle spotting or bleeding. Any moderate to severe pain, I love that Emily mentioned this, should be investigated further. So I consider this anything above a 3 on a 1 to 10 pain scale. If you're taking more than 2 painkillers per cycle, or if it feels like more than a muscle cramp, like after you've worked out really hard and you feel that twinge, that's kind of the extent that it should be. If you're surpassing that, tell somebody who will listen. Because I can personally, I think all of us here have maybe run into a doctor situation where I have told them, hey, I have this like horrible period pain. And they're like, great, that's normal, pop Advil. Not one of those. Not one of those. Call someone like us and we'll help you out. So another very important factor of a healthy cycle would be that pre-ovulatory phase. What you want to see around days 10 to 23, because like we saw, this phase is quite different for different people. You want to see clear signs of pending ovulation, which just means what are your cervical mucus patterns. So you should start seeing this come in a cyclical pattern, which I'll explain to you what healthy is, starting at around day 10, but it can come as early as day 5 if you're someone who has a cycle on the shorter end. We'll want to see cervical mucus patterns for anywhere between 2 to 7 days of your cycle. Any less, and that would be scant, we would want to, there are definitely ways that we can improve it and increase the amount. Any more than that, we would want to look into that as well, because that could be absolutely an indicator of an underlying root cause issue. Ovulation, of course, we want to confirm that that's happening, and there are very simple ways to do that. And then the post-ovulatory phase, the biggest thing here is that length. So we want to make sure that yours is at least 12 days. This is not only important for health, because what it means is you're making enough progesterone to get the benefits of progesterone that you just heard about, but also when you go to conceive, the progesterone is making that endometrium very hospitable and like a good place for a fertilized egg to embed and get nourished and survive. So if you don't have that well-maintained uterine lining in the luteal phase, unfortunately, even if fertilization does occur, it won't be hospitable for an implanted egg. So I want to define fertility because my goal is to reframe it. Everyone hears fertility and thinks babies, but I love this World Health Organization quote where it says being fertile is central to the highest attainable standard of physical and mental health. And this like sounds really freaking dramatic at first, but when you think about it, it's so true because a reproductive system, it's the lowest priority system in your body. You've got cardiovascular system, digestive system, respiratory system, endocrine system. They all need to be functioning to keep you alive until tomorrow. You do not need the ability to reproduce to stay alive until tomorrow. That's why when we start to get things out of balance, fertility is the first thing to go. And often it's the last thing to be regained when you're on a health journey. That's why paying attention to it's so important too, because it's giving you the real-time feedback every month. Like, did you eat enough this month? Did you exercise too much this month? Were you too damn stressed? It'll show up in your cycle in ways that you're probably not even expecting it to. So I say this next part to be sort of the antidote to the just stress or don't stress too much and you'll have healthy fertility, because, and I love the polyvagal framework that you shared, Emily, because it's so true. This is essentially what like translating everything that you were just saying, which was you gave the very actionable things. And this is sort of like the theory behind it, which is any stress on the system, whether you feel stressed or not, is an assault to fertility. And that could look like anything. So poor diet, not sleeping enough, being sedentary or exercising too much, undernourishing. So even if you are eating enough, do you have enough nutrient density in your diet? Are you exposed to too many endocrine disrupting chemicals, which can unfortunately absolutely screw with your fertility? Are there things like unprocessed emotions or constant distractions? So I think you beautifully summed it up. I won't go too deep into it. But just so you know, when you hear stress on the system, it's not necessarily, I have too much going on and I feel terribly stressed. It's everything, and it all matters. And unfortunately, we're living in the most toxic environment, both mentally and physically, in modern history. So if you want to really protect, preserve, and optimize your fertility, we have to be aware of this, and we have to be on the offensive and the defensive. So the way I like to teach people to do this is by just getting familiar with your fertile signs, which are a free fertility test every single month. So you don't need to go and get expensive labs done. You absolutely can. We love data, but you don't have to because your period is going to tell your cycles is going to tell you a lot about how you're doing already. So all your fertile signs are simply the direct visible result of what the estrogen and the progesterone are doing. So what you see and how you see it are ways, are we making enough of the hormones? Are they coming at the right time? Are they triggering the events that they're supposed to be triggering? You can see all of that just by tracking these things. So I love this graphic because it puts everything together beautifully. We have that rising estrogen in the follicular phase, thanks to the developing follicles. That rising estrogen is also going to trigger your cervical mucus to start flowing. So that's when you're going to start seeing, it's you had these very dry days, and then all of a sudden you have this cervical mucus patch of your cycle. That's thanks to the estrogen. Once you do ovulate, that's what's causing the progesterone to be produced, thanks to the corpus luteum, the structure that got left behind inside the ovary. That's where it's coming from. That's going to close up the cervix, dry up that cervical mucus. So that's why you stop seeing it after your fertile window. And that's also what increases your body temperature is the progesterone. So temperature, a lot like the natural cycles, I'll call it out. They do amazing at closing the fertile window because it means you've ovulated, which you see through your temperature. What they don't do amazing at is opening it, which is why you need to rely on cervical mucus. And that's actually, unfortunately, where the risk of unintentional pregnancy lies, is it's great that we can close it, but where you really want to be confident in like, are you fertile, yes or no? That's where we need cervical mucus as well. And that's why trusting your body is always going to be superior to outsourcing your power to these apps and gadgets. I still use natural cycles, but I don't trust it fully. So a bit on cervical mucus and why she is the queen fertile sign. I'll also just say, when I say cervical mucus, um, this isn't a method where you have to go digging for things. Like the method that I teach is an external wipe. We have a way of notating and classifying what you're seeing to make sense of it. And once there's a bit of a learning curve, but once you get the hang of it, it's like it takes me 5 seconds extra in the bathroom to just notice. Like this is not something you've got to completely upset your hygiene in your life for. So when we're talking about cervical mucus, this is why we have the fertile window of 6 days, even though ovulation is a 1 day event. The cervical mucus, basically, the vagina is far too acidic to keep sperm alive. When we have the cervical mucus, that's what gives it the medium to stay alive and survive for. And then your cervix actually has crypts or hotels. It's got sperm hotels to keep the sperm alive so that they can wait the 5 days for for an egg to be ovulated and to potentially try to fertilize that egg. So that's why you've got keeping the sperm alive and you're letting them hang out during those 5 days. It also does a really cool thing, like women are amazing. They capacitate the sperm, so they're making it more motile to be able to swim to and penetrate an egg. So we're just like making it all happen in that fertile window. When you're looking at what's coming out during your cycle, you'll notice that in the beginning of your cycle, probably after menstruation, those few days following your period, it's dry. You're not really seeing much of anything. As the estrogen rises, this is what you're going to start to see, something that maybe looks a little creamier or tacky, maybe more like lotion. When we get to pending ovulation, this is where we see that egg whitey, lubricative, stretchy, clear mucus. And there's no such thing as more or less fertile because, like I said, if you see any mucus, the sperm can stay alive and they can chill in the hotel. But when you start to see this stuff, which I love that you put this real life example here, it means that you're as close to ovulation as possible. It's go time if you want to try to conceive, or if you're not, definitely wrap that because ovulation's coming. And then post ovulation, in a healthy cycle, we expect the progesterone to dry it back up. So you won't be seeing it after you ovulate. It goes back to dry. So why it's so important to see, no matter if you want to have kids or if you don't, no matter what your health goal is right now or how old you are, it's really just a free health check. So for health, completely, devoid of fertility, it's a good way to check in on how your estrogen and progesterone are doing. There are also clear indicators we can look for of cervical dysplasia. So this is abnormal cervical cell growth, which could put you at increased risk of cervical cancer. So this is like a monthly way to check on your cervical health versus a PAP every couple of years. And also, based on what you're seeing, it can alert you to things like infections, STI, or any bacteria. If you are using a fertility awareness method for birth control, it lets you know exactly when to use protection and avoid pregnancy because it's telling you, hey, you've opened your fertile window. And if you're using it to try to conceive, well, amazing. It's going to let you know that you are fertile right now. And thanks to understanding what the characteristics of the mucus are, I know I put the term peak day in here, don't worry about it. Basically, that's when you see that egg whitey, clear, stretchy, lubricative mucus. 80% of the time, the last day you see that clear, stretchy, lubricative mucus is the day of ovulation. The other fertile sign that I'll talk about with you guys is basal body temperature. So like I mentioned, this rises in response to ovulation. So if you are taking your temperature every day, you've probably seen that in a lot of fertility contexts, people do that, or a lot of the gadgets now. So I have an Oura ring, or if people wear the temp drop or have the new version of an Apple Watch, you can get essentially that's not true basal body temperature. It's like skin temperature, and they'll adjust it in an algorithm to give you an approximation of your temperature. But it's a really good proxy. I mean, I use the Aura because I'm lazy. But what you're going to look for post ovulation is this temperature rise. So a sustained shift that is higher than your temperatures were in the pre-ovulatory phase. So again, an app like Natural Cycles, amazing at understanding this for you and closing the fertile window. But this opening the fertile window can only be done. See, temperature doesn't help you at all. It can only be done with understanding cervical mucus patterns. So quickly, fertility awareness method, if you've heard about this, I mean, I was someone who was raised Catholic, and I thought that this was like very unscientific jargon. I was like, they don't know what they're doing. They're just, whatever. I had a very poor idea of what fertility awareness was. But all it is at its core, it's being very scientific and very observation focused. Is today a fertile day? Yes or no? Being able to answer that question simply using what you know about your own body. That's all it is. Where you might have heard, oh, this method isn't reliable, this method can fail, it's when you start introducing rhythm method thinking, which is where you use past cycles to predict your current or future ones. This is when people say things like, I always ovulate on day 16, or I'm not fertile now. My fertile window never opens until day 10. Like stuff like that you can't do because it's not how biology works. And this is where the accidents happen. It's also why the predictive algorithm of apps are so imperfect, because that's exactly what they're doing. They're using your past cycle information to predict your current and future ones. They're quite robust, and I'm not saying they're bad in any way, but your body signs will always be superior to them. So the method that I teach, there are many different types of fertility awareness methods. What I just described to you was symptothermal. So what that means is using symptom, cervical mucus, and thermal, basal body temperature, to have two data points so that you can very confidently know when am I fertile, when am I not, every single day. I'm gonna run through the birth control stuff. I'm looking at the time. I'm like, no, we got to do it. Real quick, because some of you may be on birth control and you're not interested in coming off of it. That is okay. I was on it for quite a long time too. And honestly, even knowing everything, I probably would have still like been like, yep, give it to me because it's too much for me to not be on it right now. But what I wish is that everyone gave us informed consent. You have a right to know what it does to your body, and you have a right to know how to mitigate those things and then how to set yourself up for success. So, quickly, again, I don't tell you any of this to scare you. There are solutions to every single one of these things. And there are things that you can do starting today, even while you're on birth control. But when we talk about the effects on our body, I don't call them side effects because, like, what is that? It's just an effect that this biologic is having on you. Just if it's not intended, you can't get away with calling it a side effect. When we talk about birth control, and here most of this information is coming from studies on the oral contraceptive pill, because that's the most common form of birth control. But we do see an increased risk of blood clots, anywhere from 4 to 7 times your normal risk. Things like vulvar pain is very, very common because you have a decrease in the labia minora and a reduction in the diameter of the vaginal opening. So it's literally shrinking some of reproductive organs It shrinks the clit by 20% in some studies, and it shrinks the ovaries by about 50% in hormonal contraceptive users compared to non-users. Now, they go back to baseline, no worries once you discontinue. But isn't this really good to know? Because if you're having painful sex, for instance, it could be the birth control pill because of this thinness and this shortening of the diameter. And like, can you imagine if like the penis shrunk? No one would, birth control wouldn't exist, but here we are. Like, this is okay for women to go through. It gets me very, very heated, but it can absolutely put you at an increased risk for certain nutritional deficiencies. We'd want to watch out for those. It does change the way you metabolize certain nutrients. So just knowing this is really good. Like, what should you prioritize? What could you supplement with? And then also because of its effect on sex hormones, it can lower libido. And I say this last part, how the Depo-Provera shot is currently used to castrate sex offenders. I don't, obviously, that dosage is much higher and they're getting it a lot more frequently than they were if you were to get it as a contraceptive. I say that to tell you, to make it crystal clear, that birth control isn't designed to keep your reproductive system safe and optimal and functioning. It's designed to turn it off. And that's what we want it to do. But just please do be aware that this isn't like keeping everything good to go. And when your doctor is like, yeah, just come off of it a month or two before you want to try to conceive, that's some crap advice for all of these reasons right here. So when you are coming off the pill or thinking about it, like I said, there are plenty of things to do while on it. There are plenty of things to do to smooth that transition off of it. But please do know that if you are coming off of it with the intent to conceive, there is a period of subfertility. So that's different depending on the contraceptive type you are on. So I have a few listed here of the length of time you can expect to see all the changes that we were talking about that are caused by birth control that it takes for them to remedy. So you need your ovaries to come back to size. You need the hormone ramping up again. Like you need to give your body time. So I always recommend coming off contraceptives at least a year and a half to 2 years before you plan to try. This is, very counter to what most of the evidence says, or actually, no, it's counter to what most professionals say, but the evidence says this is actually the right thing you should be doing for optimal fertility and reproductive health. It'll ensure nutrient repletion, you have the proper levels and the function of the hormones, and that your cycle is optimized for conception. Because if you have a red flag, you're never going to know unless you give yourself time to check it out. And if think about it, you're nutrient deficient, so will your baby will be too, because they're going to pull everything from you. This is why we can't just rely on prenatals or a healthy diet or a really great lifestyle. The other thing I see, I just want to like throw this out there. I think it's amazing that there are so many like fertility tests and at-home tests that you can do. Hold off for a bit if you are on birth control or recently came off of it. I see it far too many times where doctors will test AMH levels, which is ovarian reserve, either while someone's on birth control, which is crazy, or when they are fresh off of it and they want to see how their fertility is doing. Yes, your numbers will look bad because of the birth control, but they will not stay bad. So do not scare yourself and do not let a doctor scare you that when you see a, poor fertility marker because of, again, the birth control was designed to do that, not to keep your ovarian reserve at its best. It's know that it's okay and set yourself up for success. Like I'm going to wait at least 6 months before I get these tests done to get the most accurate understanding. I'm not going to do it in a situation where my body has literally been suppressing the system because that's all you're testing. It's not going to be helpful information. So it's a temporary drop. AMH levels can increase. They do increase. There are many ways to do that. So this is why they'll return to baseline after birth control, but just hold off on testing for at least 6 months. So yes, like I said, your cycle is a free fertility test every single month. This is an example. When Emily and I are saying pay attention to it, you don't have to do it to this level, but if you wanted to, this is where you understand how you're doing on every single one of the 6 features of a healthy cycle. And I'm throwing this up. You don't have to do it forever. You could do it, spot check it. It's great to get a few months worth of data to really understand how your body's doing, so that way you can do the things that are perfectly designed for you, depending on what's going on. But just to show you the clear diagnostic information we can get from a simple chart. First of all, your temperature is going to tell us a lot about your health. So if your temperature is lower than a particular baseline, which actually is 97.4, 36 36.3. Does that make sense in Celsius? I think it's 36.3. Um, I hope that makes sense. It can indicate a reduced metabolic function or a thyroid issue. So taking your temperature isn't just good for ovulation confirmation, it's good for health. We also, don't worry about this crazy stuff. This is what I teach, but essentially, this is that standardized notation system of what's coming out of your vagina, like cervical mucus, blood, spotting. Basically, shorter light periods can tell us a story. Scant cervical mucus, or the way it's showing up, the way it's looking, the color, the texture, that can be a really good sign of something wrong. If you get cervical mucus right before your period, so that's really common too. You get spotting before your period, or you have continuous mucus when we know it should be dry, thanks to the progesterone. That's telling us, hey, you ovulated, so you know you're making progesterone, but you're not making enough. So we need to now intervene ways to increase progesterone. And here is what I'm talking about too. Here's an 11-day luteal phase. Close, but not quite. We want it to be 12 to 14 days. So just looking at this one cycle alone, we see, okay, progesterone's quite low. We're quite scant on cervical mucus, and we potentially are looking at a thyroid or metabolism issue. So from here, now we're like, great, we have very clear health metrics to focus on. And then as every single month goes by, you essentially get free gratification. Like, oh, I see it improving month to month. You don't have to wait for a blood test or anything like that. So if you have any questions on that, please do reach out to us. That is it. Sorry, I went over 7 minutes,
What
but thank
was
you all.
it?
That was
Oh,
a
honestly,
lot of
Michelle,
fun.
that was amazing. Like it's so important. All the stuff about contraception and birth control as well at the end, I think that stuff is just, yeah, it's super, super helpful. There was a question on the last slide. What does HA stand for on the last slide? Just whilst
Awesome.
it.
Yes. HA stands for hypothalamic amenorrhea, which is just a fancy way of saying the spectrum of like the worst end of the spectrum would be lose your period. And usually it's because you're not eating enough, over exercising. It's really common in athletes, um, or people who just aren't simply eating enough of the right foods. If you've lost your period, this would be considered a candidate for you. But there are also, if I go back, like there are ways to tell if you're on the spectrum to lose your period. Like maybe you don't notice it, it's still coming, but thanks to things like scant cervical mucus or that premenstrual spotting, we know that hormones aren't coming in at the right levels. So that already puts us on the alert of, okay, you're not getting enough fuel to make enough progesterone, which, just an aside, estrogen and progesterone are built from the same thing, which is cholesterol. So, and then we recycle cholesterol from the food that we eat. So this is why like the low fat craze was not so hot for a lot of hormonal health reasons. So those are good things to look for. Courtney.
Thank you both for this information. Super helpful. Just really quick, so to confirm, you said the basal body temperature rises, and that's like the sign you've ovulated. So is the start of the like sticky mucus like the first day you see the mucus? That would be a sign that that's like your first fertile window day?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. So looking here, this you ovulate the day before you see that temperature shift. So according to my temperature, well, this person's temperature, it would have been day 16. If your question, that would have been closing my fertile window. If you want to open it, that would be the first day of seeing any type of cervical mucus, whether it's clear, stretchy, whether it's khaki, white, pasty, all it's like so important, even though like it's typically described as more fertile or less fertile because you see egg white, that's so much more fertile. No, because even if you're here and it's the pasty lotiony stuff, that can keep the sperm alive. It can let them chill in the cervix. So if you were to ovulate in the next 5 days, conception can happen. So ovulation, if you, any cycle with ovulation, pregnancy is possible, whether you see cervical mucus or you don't. But yes, that is exactly how you would open. Your fertile window is the first day you see that.
Thank you. Can I ask one more question?
Yes.
Okay, so for your period, I know it's ideal to be like the bright red color. If it's more on the darker brown side, do you have suggestions of like where to start looking to make it? more bright red color?
Yes. So actually, and Emily, I would love to hear your response to this too. But in my world, what that could mean is my first question would be, are you actually ovulating? Because even though you can bleed without ovulating, which means it's not a true menstrual period. True menstrual period, by definition, just means it comes after an ovulation event, that cycle. But most people, they don't really know if they're ovulating or not. They see a bleed and they're like, cool, normal, healthy. Darker blood could be an indication of oxidation. So it's there too long. That's why I'm thinking maybe it's just like coming out from, a previous uterine building, or you didn't quite ovulate, so it's coming through. And then I would also tie it back to progesterone. Maybe you are ovulating, but there isn't enough progesterone to support like keeping that uterine lining really robust until the end of the luteal phase, so the start of your next period. And some is coming through and it's getting exposed to oxygen, which is why you see it darker brown. Emily, I'd love your thoughts.
Yeah, no, exactly. I was going to say, kind of look at your ovulation. Like, look at the signs. Are you ovulating? It could be old blood, just old blood that's still there. So that's quite normal though, I would say, to have that old blood as well, that darker blood to come through. And it's usually not something to be concerned about. If it is going into, like if you start with that old kind of blood and then it goes into more of that brighter color, I'd say it's not something to really be concerned about. Would you say the same, Michelle?
I so I actually it's both, right? Because it's super common and
Yeah,
it's not an indication that anything would be like it's
yeah,
on the spectrum of issues, it's a lower one, but
yeah.
is it optimal? No. And actually, so there are a few things you can do. My first would be like maybe we just need to support progesterone a bit more to keep that uterine lining really intact until we're ready to fully bleed.
Mm.
The other thing is, I don't know if you've ever looked into like vaginal steaming, actually seems to
Yeah.
really help people who are experiencing that dark blood spotting, typically like right before the start of their bleed or after. So if you have a few days of that dark brown after your period, um, vaginal steaming, actually, I've had some really great feedback on people who have
Mm.
done that, and that's been able to
I
help
have
them clear that
actually,
up. Yeah, have you too?
I have actually done that before as well. Um, but I worked with someone to do steaming, and it was with herbs, like specifically for certain issues, and like they can tailor it as well to like what your issue is that you are experiencing. And I found the steaming really beneficial. You can do it at home as well, but I like worked with someone who had a background in it because that you can get your own herbs and stuff, but I wanted to, yeah, make sure I was doing it correctly, and it worked really well. It was great and interesting, but it's great.
Thank you.
Yeah. Mia, did you want to go?
Yes, thank you so much, guys. That was amazing. I've just got a question. So I'm on a hormonal coil. Do you still think it's worth tracking everything, even though you're
Mm.
on the coil? Because obviously it is slightly different. Like my cycle is probably a bit weird.
I so are you, yeah, so I'm actually also on a hormonal IUD,
Hmm.
and this is one of the contraceptions, which I mean, I was on the pill. I had a really difficult time with it. I suffered a lot after. Once I did a lot of the work, the education, the information, the coil was probably like the only contraception that I personally would choose because it still allows you in most cases to ovulate, and it doesn't fully shut that down. So you still can ovulate. So I actually will still notice my cervical mucus, and I still notice it doesn't completely shut it down. It
Yeah.
more suppresses the bleed. And so for me, I find because I'm still having a cycle, and it's one of the only contraceptions I want to say that still allows you to have that cycle, whereas most of them kind of just completely shut it down. Um, then tracking for me is something that I do. Um, because I feel like I'm still experiencing the phases and going through the motions, even though some months I might not necessarily bleed and it's been like suppressed. So yeah, I have like a personal take on that for me, Michelle. I want to make sure that everything I'm saying is also like completely correct because Michelle, you can go into
Yes.
it a little bit.
And actually, I have had the same experience. I went from a pill to a hormonal IUD,
Mm.
and right now, so I will say there are some limitations, right? So even though you might not be able to experience the full effect of tracking fertile signs, I completely agree. Tracking anything is better than nothing, and it gives you really good data anyway. You do ovulate, so like you absolutely nailed it. It's some of the time, so anywhere from like 50 to 75% of the time, more when it gets a little older and the hormones are, dying out a bit. So it could be helpful. Track it, see, was this an ovulatory cycle? Do I feel different versus ones that I saw were anovulatory? Like that just gives you a lot of really good information about how your body's doing.